All right, stand by. 10 seconds.
Camera one.
Talent.
Ready, camera two.
Cue talent.
1.
Roll to record.
Protesters fight the cops while crime and murder spike in America's cities. I'm John Phillips, and this is The Rundown. In bloody Baltimore, 29 were shot, 9 were killed over the Memorial Day weekend, bringing the total number of homicides so far this month to a mind-boggling 35. That's the highest one-month body count in at least 15 years. In Chicago, 43 were shot, including a 4-year-old girl, and 12 were killed over the same weekend. In New York City, the Post reports that you're 45% more likely to be murdered after a spike in killings there. We're going to need to do a Memorial Day for those killed on Memorial Day. Meanwhile, Officer James Bennett Jr. was shot and killed in his squad car in New Orleans on Sunday. In New Mexico, police officer and Air Force veteran Greg Benner was shot and killed during a routine traffic stop on Monday night. And in Omaha, Nebraska, policewoman Carrie Orozco, who was a Girl Scout leader, a volunteer with the Special Olympics, and a coach at the local Boys and Girls Club, was shot and killed trying to arrest a gang member the day before she was scheduled to go on maternity leave to welcome her infant daughter born prematurely home from the hospital. And finally, the St. Louis Cardinals mascot, Fred Bird, is in trouble for being photographed holding a Police Lives Matter sign. In fact, Cardinals management went so far as to say he didn't know what was on the sign and asked police organizations to remove the photo from their websites. It couldn't be more clear. To protesters, police lives don't matter. As officers continue to be slaughtered and politicians scrutinize and criticize their every action, America's cities are being allowed to collapse into murder and mayhem. As a nation, we're choosing civil chaos over civil order. To explore this question and much, much more, we turn to PJTV contributor Scott Ott from his home studio in Dallas, Texas, and here in Los Angeles, stand-up comic and PJTV contributor Stephen Kruiser. Kruiser, we'll start with you. The whole broken windows theory that James Q. Wilson wrote about and developed that was adopted in cities like New York under Rudy Giuliani, Baltimore under Martin O'Malley, essentially says you need to go after criminals for the small crimes because they're the ones that also commit the big crimes. And if you crack down on the small crimes, then you lower the murder rate, you lower the rape rate, you lower the armed robbery rate in the process. The crime went down under O'Malley and Giuliani. Now we're seeing the cops being told to back off by civic leaders. They are backing off, and now crime is going through the roof. Are these numbers proving James Q. Wilson, Rudy Giuliani, and Martin O'Malley to be right?
Yes, I think that if you create an environment that's less friendly to the criminals won't function as well. I think very much so. And it's not just, it's not just the arrest. You got to prosecute them. You got to put some of them in jail too. And the hue and cry right now is all over incarceration, incarceration. You know, that's what we're talking about. What happened in the Clinton era? Hillary's now against it all of a sudden. But if you're just arresting them, they're back on the street the next day. They don't fear arrest. You need to get some people arrested, some people prosecuted, some people put in jail. And this situation has spiraled so out of hand now. Scott Walker yesterday was being interviewed, and he said, I don't want to say cops are gun shy, but they are. They're afraid of getting shot. They're afraid of getting sued. They can't do their jobs. So we're creating a dysfunctional law enforcement class right now as things are spinning out of control. And what disturbs me most isn't that the people in the street are getting agitated, and you see the usual suspects with the agitation for the riots and everything. It's that now, like, St. Louis Cardinals management wants to come down on the PC side of this and say it's the people who really have a vested interest. Try having a Cardinals game with no cops or security there. See how that works out for you, okay? That's what bothers me, is that so many people who are sitting in lofty perches away from all of this are going, oh yeah, we're gonna side with the protesters and the rioters and the anarchy people now. Find out how the anarchy works out for you.
Scott, remember back to the 70s and 80s and really even the early 90s when a lot of people in academia were writing about big cities, major American cities, and they were saying they're ungovernable. Maybe it's just not possible to govern these big cities. And then you got the Rudy Giulianis and the Dick Reardons and the people that turned things around and proved that you could govern these big cities if you did it the right way. Are these cities falling back to where they were in the 70s and 80s when everyone was saying that they were ungovernable?
Well, they're ungovernable if you've got people running them who don't understand how to govern, and that's typically been Democrat-controlled councils, Democrat mayors. and the people that they've put in place in the positions of bureaucracy in these cities. And I don't know how this doesn't stick to that party more effectively. But year after year, these same people get reelected. I do know one of the factors is that there's such a low participation rate among the people who are most affected by these policies, that the people who are able to cling to office are getting elected not by the people in the neighborhoods where the gunfire is being sprayed around, but by people who are in the sort of the collar neighborhoods of those cities. You know, the mayor of Baltimore said yesterday or today, said, you know, we need to make sure that we give the police the support they need to find the people who are doing these crimes. Where was that support when she was shooting off her mouth during the protest? Where was that support when she was celebrating the fact that they had arrested 6 police officers? This is the natural consequence of telling people that it's more likely than not that the police have done something wrong if somebody gets injured during a law enforcement action.
Is it wrong of me to have little sympathy when you look at these numbers? And these numbers are horrific, and they should shock anyone with a conscience. But I'm looking at the paper this weekend, and I'm seeing these numbers, and I say to myself, you know what? If you want to crack down on this and you don't want this to happen, then you need an aggressive police department that has the support not only of the city leaders, but of the community that they serve. And the police department in Baltimore decidedly does not have that. They don't have support from the mayor. They don't have support from the local electeds on the city council. They don't have support from the community. I can't tell you how many interviews I saw during the rioting where people said, we're more afraid of the cops than we are of the Bloods and the Crips. Well, okay, if that's your attitude and you want the police to back off, then don't be surprised when you see these murders. Don't be surprised when you see these shootings. I mean, it's almost like a box score, like something you would see for a baseball game. How many people shot? How many people murdered?
Well,
do you have the same sympathy problem I do?
Well, and no, I don't think you're lacking in sympathy. I think it's a very realistic, you know, it's easy to say they brought this upon themselves, but I'm going to go back to this. The outside agitators in each one of these cities were a big problem, okay? Ferguson, there were no Ferguson people leading riots in Ferguson. Those were all people shipped in who had the money, who were brought in by other people.
In fact, some of them paid by Acorn.
Yes. And, you know, and then in Baltimore now they're mad because they're not getting the checks. They were sent there to stir things up. So it's not always the local community that's doing it. There are people who have a vested interest in this anarchy motif that they want to become prevalent in America. But I think the other problem is, as you said, it's like a box score. It's statistics. What they do to get the message out is they'll get the picture of the one guy who was hurt or something, and then they'll get a more innocent looking picture of him if he was a criminal. And then they'll say things like, I read a story just 2 weeks ago about the guy in Ferguson, Michael Brown, was that his name? About unarmed black men. That's what they still refer to him as, not the one that the Holder Justice Department decided it was a criminal too. But they're still referring to him. So they get this out. I think the only way to counter this is with graphic imagery of this bloody violence. You can't just keep throwing numbers at people. It's meaningless to them after a while. It's just you just become numb to that kind of thing. But if people are going to have sympathy for what the cops are facing, they're going to have to see this a little better.
Scott, the practical result, from my point of view, is going to be people who are appalled by this violence. They're not going to stay in these cities and vote these idiots out of office that go after the cops, that go after their jugular. They're going to vote with their feet. They're going to move out of the cities. We saw a lot of that go down in the 60s when we had the rioting, and people just didn't feel safe in their homes. They moved to the suburbs. They moved to rural America. I could see another mass exodus from America's cities if this doesn't get turned around fast.
The ones who can, John, the ones who can. And sadly, the people who are most affected by this kind of chaos, by this kind of anarchy, by this kind of hatred of law and order are the people who can't, the people who can't live. They're the 4-year-old girls with the bullet wounds in their head. They're the little old lady who has to walk. We forget this sometimes. We who live in the suburbs and, you know, can hop into our 4, 6, or 8-cylinder vehicle and go wherever we please at the drop of a hat. We forget that there are 68-year-old women who have to walk to the bodega on the corner. We forget that there are people whose children have to walk several blocks to school through these free fire zones created by policies that denigrate the rule of law, that denigrate law and order. And these are the people that we should be most concerned about. I mean, if Republicans really want to align themselves with justice, they need to go to these places, stand with these people, and let the government in Washington, D.C. and the government in these city halls know that we will not stand for this kind of abuse. It's a tiny handful of people, by the way, in these densely populated neighborhoods who are sowing fear and terror into the hearts of little children and little old women and parents who wonder whether they're going to get to go to their kids' graduation.
I've got a prediction for you.
Okay.
It's not going to get better until there's a two-party system in these cities. A one-party system will always produce this type of chaos.
I agree. It's because when there's no alternative in any situation, it's bad. But you're right. This is we've discussed this a lot. These cities have largely been under the same party's rule for half a century. I mean, not a couple of years. This isn't one or two administrations. Baltimore, Detroit, all of them, 50 years at least. And that's a long time for anybody to come in and do what they want, and there is no accountability for those in charge. And you can see where they're talking about with the police in a lot of people's minds are just part of the government too, and they don't separate that. It should be not separated in people's minds. That's what I'm saying. The government they trust here is the same government they don't trust over here, and they need to understand sometimes they're the same things and maybe not keep perpetuating the same stuff. Vote people in who will do something with the police unions that won't allow, that won't allow bad seeds to remain. You're right. You need the alternative. Something's got to change. This is horrific.
Stephen Kruiser, you get the last word. That's all the time we have for today, but now it's your turn. Will the American people choose chaos over law and order, or are we already fed up with the anti-police movement? Tell us what you think in the comment section below. I'm John Phillips. Thanks so much for watching The Rundown.